And they came to see me and they said, you seem to be helping a lot of people. A lot of people tell me that you've helped them a lot to think clearly. So I said, well, what's your problem? He says, his name was Smiley. Apparently he worked for Al Capone. And he said, I have 2 Rolls Royces. I said, well, good, what's your problem? He said, I like to drive those cars through Nigger Town. These are his words. And I like to watch those boogies looking at me driving that fancy car. And I go around the block continuously with my new car. He says, why do I do that? I said, because you've been loused up. When you were a kid, you were looking at a guy drive a fancy car. He said, boy, I wish I had that. And you're still that same kid now, but you're driving your car, watching the other kids envy you. He says, yeah? I said, yeah. So he said, well, none of my friends look down at me. I said, look, you're not very bright doing that. You're wasting your life. So he said, nobody ever said that to me. I said, well, I'm saying it to you. You want me to help you? The only way I can help you is tell you why you drive your car around like that. He said, well, where can I learn? That's his word. Where can I learn more? So I gave him some books, which he couldn't read too well, so I read to him on how people were brought up under certain conditions and became Germans or Frenchmen or whatever. And he says, you mean I behave like I do? He didn't use those words, because I was brought up in the slums and hungry. When you're brought up in the slums and everybody's poor, there's no way you can be generous and give things to people. So what they did, the kids, in order to live, they were given such lousy jobs and so little money, like $3 a week for hard work and long hours. So they learned to knock at a store. A guy had a cleaning shop and said, I want $1 a week protection money from you. And I want $1 a week from your grocery store. Otherwise, your grocery stand will be knocked over. So he said, no. And they knocked over your grocery stand. So they had to pay off these little gangs that went around from one store to the other. They had no other way to live. So they became gangs that threatened stores. They'd throw acid on clothing in a cleaner shop if the guy didn't pay him $2 a week. You know what I mean? So they formed gangs. So when the Jews walked through an Italian neighborhood, they formed their own gangs. So the Italians used to fight the Jews, the Irish used to fight the Italians and the Jews. You know what I mean? Of course, they were all threats to each other. Then the guy that won the whole community became the gang leader. Then the Italians had an older man, and they called him the Don. He said, if anybody beats you up, let us know who's beating you up, and we'll fix their wagon. So they gave the Don $5 a week, all the families, whatever they could, and he protected the Italians. These protection groups were for the Irish, the Italians, the Greeks, the Jews. There were Jewish gangs, there's Italian gangs, because they all had the same problem. And a lot of the Irish were alcoholics. They needed alcohol. There was no therapy sessions then. And they found out through research that eating a lot of potatoes, which the Irish did, they were poor, gave you a propensity toward alcoholism, made the drive toward alcohol a little stronger. It wasn't that they were bad, that Irish drank alcohol. The Jews were rarely alcoholics, but when they went on the same diet, similar to the Irish, they too became alcoholics. That was very interesting. So that was the food environment affecting behavior. Another thing that affects behavior was the parents' environment. You know, don't play with that Catholic, you're a Lutheran. So all these different environments, and they used to paint the slums with Dutch boy white lead paint, and that paint used to disintegrate and affects the brains of poor children. It damages brain tissue. So when you took poor kids, black kids, Mexican kids to school, they weren't as bright because their brains were damaged by white lead. I began to look into all aspects of it. The environment was not just the home you were raised in, the food you ate. If your parents knew nothing about nutrition, they went to quick food places, and you ate frankfurters and salami, which has very little nutrients. And so that weakens the brain. So they gave kids tests in school, and they found out the minorities were not as intelligent as the white people that had good jobs. Well, they fed their kids better food, and the other kids suffered from malnutrition. So it wasn't the poor kids that were dumb, it was the nutrition and the uneducated parents that give their kids a cup of coffee and a hot dog in the morning. You know, there's no nutrition in that, and that affects learning ability. And also, a husband and wife would fight a lot because she said, I've been wearing the same dress for 3 months, I need a new dress. And the father would say, if I don't have a brake job done on my car, I can't get to work. So what do I want me to do, buy you a dress or have a brake job done? So the wife says, okay, maybe the week after I'll get a new dress. So then the old man's kids began to cough. Do I take him to a doctor? I hardly have any money to live. Or maybe next day he won't be coughing as much. So he'd wait. And the next day the kid's coughing more. So he has to take him to the clinic, take a day off work, get less pay, sit there all day. And the doctor says, you need these pills. He says, I can't afford it. So they give him a few pills, and the kid will be sick. He's up to here in pressure, you know what I mean? So a friend says, hey, look, if we take that bank on the corner, you and I got 2 guns, we might be able to get out of this shit. So he says, why not? But then he says, well, I don't like to steal money from people. He says, they don't give a shit about you. What do you care about them for? If they cared about you, they'd help you. And the guy says, you know, that's right. So he robs a bank, he gets caught, he's in jail for 10 years, loses his family, his house. There are no bad people. There are people under certain circumstances. Stress is so high that I found that out during World War II. The most respectable German families were fighting over food and garbage cans because food was scarce. So I asked the Germans, why did you gas the Jews? And they said, 2,000 planes a day were bombing Germany. They knocked out all food supplies, our soldiers weren't being fed, so we gassed thousands of Jews, not because we wanted to kill them. We could not feed them. That's a totally different story than you get from the Jews or the others. But the whole thing is no good because it's all about scarcity. So I figured if we can produce in abundance, which they did during the war, they fed millions of soldiers. They didn't work. They killed. And they gave machine guns and airplanes and everything. Where'd the money come from to do all that? Why can't we do that during peace? You know, so I became very much anti-social. Anti-establishment, you know what that means? An established culture was one that worked. I was interested in the word called emergent culture. That is one that keeps growing instead of established. Established means if you live in a world that works, you keep things that way because it worked for you. But an emergent culture is always changing and growing. That's why I figured we're not civilized. It's an ongoing process. So all of those things, my experiences with the guy with acromegaly, the prison, the kid giving a note to a girl, and then I watched a chain gang inspection. A guy came from Washington in a big car, and the chain gang, all these guys were chained together with 2 Southerners on both ends of the row. This guy got out of the car and says, is everything all right, boys? What do you expect him to say? No? He got back in his car and went to Washington. And I knew that that was no good because they put mostly blacks in tin boxes called, you know what a sweat box is? It's a tin box on stilts in the chain gang, prison areas. And they put a man in that box, and in the South it's 115 to 120 degrees in that box. And the guys bang on him, let me out, let me out. And I was in a transit camp. That's a camp built by the government for what they call wild boys of the road. They weren't wild, they were just kids on the road. So they built these army barracks. So we worked 3 hours a day, grew our own food, just during the Depression only. And we got 75 cents a week to buy cigarettes or chewing gum or whatever. So the chain gang was next door. and that's where I watched a tin box and a man banging on it. So the guard opened the door, and this old black man, gray hair, came out, and he fell on the ground. He said, "Please, don't put me no more in that box." He said, "I'm losing my mind." He said, "I can't live in that box. I'll kiss your shoes. I'll do anything you ask me to. Don't put me in that box no more." Mo, he spoke black accent. And I looked at that, and I saw these guards as they were standing, but they were not human. Do you know what I mean? They had no feelings at all. So I began to look at people as victims of culture. I didn't get mad at the guards or mad at the other people. I knew they were brought up without feelings. And I could see the black man not having a chance. And so I began to look at the whole world that way. This is why I never became normal. I've seen so much shit during the past, so much suffering, that I decided to try to teach people something of the world. They didn't have all these experiences. I would say I'm 94 years old, but I've seen a lot of things that you haven't seen. So you don't have similar views. I can't convince you of this, I'm only telling you what I saw. That's why I never liked psychologists or psychiatrists, because they're comfortable, they charge $65 an hour, and if a guy has financial problems, he can't come to a psychiatrist. He can go to a clinic, sit there all day, next, but this is hours, and taking a day off work puts you in deeper financial problems. So if you don't solve those problems, and I met one psychiatrist that was good. He said, if I had bank rolls of money in my desk, and I opened the desk, hand the guy $100,000 and say, "What's your problem now?" He said, "I don't have any problem." And he'd leave. He felt if he could do that, they wouldn't be having that problem. Husbands and wives usually fight over money. Do you have to buy a new dress now? You know, she says, "Look, I have to feed the kids, I have to do this," and they fight over money. And so if you did away with the money system, made things available to people, at least they can go on from there. Now this is why. I'm trying to tell you what made me the way I am. I wasn't born kind or good or bad. I encountered situations, and so that changed me. Now in school, it was my grandfather that said that people came from all over the world and made America great. The Germans gave us the printing press, the Arabs gave us mathematics, the Egyptians gave us numerals and numbers. They had a big library, ancient Egypt, that moved people forward. So my grandfather said all people made America, not just Americans. So I then began to feel that if all people made America, I said, how would you feel, Grandpa, if I pledge allegiance to the earth, not to America? You know what pledge allegiance means? I pledge allegiance to the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. I'm pledging my life to America. They do that in all countries. So I wanted to pledge allegiance to the earth and all the people on it. That's where the answer lies, not pledge allegiance to America. So since I refused in school, the teacher grabbed me by the ear right to the principal's office. And she said to the principal, "He doesn't